In the heart of a city where the streets often told stories of struggle and survival, Officer John NOTEE had spent decades patrolling the toughest neighborhoods. He was known among his colleagues as a no-nonsense, by-the-book cop, but beneath the uniform and the stern exterior, he carried the weight of every life he had tried to help. Despite his hardened demeanor, John had always wanted to make a difference beyond just locking people away. Yet years on the force had taught him one painful truth: not everyone could be saved. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video if it resonates with you. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? We love hearing from our viewers. The streets had also shaped the lives of Mike and Sara, two siblings trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to break them. Mike Wright, just 15 years old, was fiercely protective of his younger sister, Sara, who had only seen 12 summers but already knew more about hardship than most adults. Their lives had been a constant battle: absent parents, nights spent hungry, and a daily struggle to avoid the lure of the streets that promised a quick escape, but often ended in tragedy. For Mike and Sara, the neighborhood they called home was a dangerous place. It was a world where trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, and the only thing they had was each other. In this broken system, they were just another set of forgotten children, invisible to those who didn't care enough to look. It was on one of those long shifts, patrolling the city's familiar corners, that Officer John's path crossed with theirs. What seemed like just another day on the job would soon become a moment that would change all of their lives forever. One cold evening, John was called to a local store for what seemed like a routine call. 2 kids had been caught shoplifting. When he arrived at the scene, the store clerk pointed out Mike and Sara, huddled in the corner, trying to disappear under the harsh fluorescent lights. The officer's eyes narrowed as he recognized the signs, fear mixed with defiance. It was the look he'd seen countless times before in kids who had grown up too fast and in the wrong places. "Empty your pockets," John ordered, his voice calm but firm, the tone of someone who had done this more times than he could count. Mike, standing protectively in front of his sister, glared at the officer with a hardened expression, trying to appear tougher than his 15 years. Sara, barely holding back tears, followed her brother's lead, though her small frame trembled with fear. "Don't touch her!" Mike spat, his fists clenched tightly. It wasn't just about the stolen items anymore. This was about survival, about protecting what little they had left in the world. But John wasn't moved by the boy's words. He'd heard it all before. Kids caught in the system, fighting against a world that never gave them a fair shot. He knew where this road led, and he wasn't interested in hearing excuses. John stepped forward, his gaze hardening. "You think this is going to get you anywhere? You want to keep running down this path? You'll end up like every other kid I've arrested. Is that what you want?" Mike didn't respond, but the fire in his eyes spoke volumes. To him, John was just another cop who didn't understand, someone who would throw him and Sara away like everyone else had. And to John, they were just another case, another pair of kids falling through the cracks. He placed them both in the back of his squad car, believing they were just more victims of their circumstances, lost to a world that offered no second chances. But John didn't know the whole story yet. He had no idea that the decision he was making would change not only their lives, but his own as well. Later that evening, after dropping Mike and Sara off at the station, John sat down at his desk, tired, but unable to shake the image of the 2 kids from his mind. There was something different about them, something that stirred a feeling deep inside him, a sense of unfinished business. He decided to look into their background, thinking it would give him some closure, a way to categorize them as just another statistic. But what he found only deepened his unease. Their records told a heartbreaking story: parents gone, their mother lost to addiction, their father out of the picture. Mike and Sara had been on their own for nearly 2 years, surviving the best they could. No extended family had stepped in to help, and social services had failed to keep them in stable homes. Now, they were on the verge of being split up, sent to different foster homes, a separation neither of them could bear. John stared at the report, the words blurring as memories from his own past surfaced. He had grown up in a different world, but he knew what it was like to feel alone. He had joined the force to help people, to make a real difference, but somewhere along the line, he had started seeing cases instead of people. The reality of the system's failures weighed on him. He couldn't just leave them to be swallowed up by it. It was then that something shifted inside John. He didn't know what he was about to do, but he knew that simply arresting them wasn't enough. He couldn't walk away from these two children and pretend they didn't exist. Not when he knew the system would fail them the way it had failed so many others. Without fully understanding what drove him, John made a decision that would change the course of his life. He reached for the phone, his hands slightly shaking as he called the Family Services Department. "I want to see about fostering 2 kids," he said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. Taking in Mike and Sara wasn't easy. The first few weeks were a struggle for all of them. Mike, still defiant, kept his guard up, mistrusting John's every move. He saw the world as a battlefield, and he had no reason to believe this cop, who had once thrown him in the back of a squad car, would be any different from the other adults who had let him down. Sara, quieter but no less wary, followed her brother's lead. She clung to him as her protector, unsure of what to make of this new home they found themselves in. John, for his part, wasn't prepared for how hard it would be. His life as a single cop had been structured, predictable. Now he was thrust into a whirlwind of teenage angst and childhood trauma. He often found himself at a loss for words when faced with Mike's anger or Sara's tears. The walls of his once quiet home now echoed with unfamiliar sounds, arguments, slammed doors, and moments of quiet sobbing in the night. But John didn't give up. He knew it would take time for them to trust him, and he was determined to show them that he wasn't like the others who had let them down. Slowly, through small moments of patience and kindness, the ice began to thaw. John would sit with Sara in the evenings, helping her with her homework, though she rarely said much. He showed up at Mike's school events, standing quietly in the back, knowing that Mike would pretend not to notice, but that it mattered all the same. There were setbacks, of course, moments when Mike lashed out, testing John's limits, daring him to give up on them, but every time John stayed. He didn't have all the answers, but he was there. And slowly, through each shared meal and each conversation, something began to shift. Mike, for the first time in a long while, began to feel safe. He stopped waiting for the day when John would send them away, stopped pushing him away in anticipation of rejection. And Sara, whose trust had been shattered by too many broken promises, started to open up as well. She would sit next to John at the kitchen table, her small hand resting on the edge, her eyes filled with questions she wasn't ready to ask yet. But John knew that trust was growing, little by little. Bit by bit they became a family, not by blood, but by something stronger. As the months passed, the bond between John, Mike, and Sara deepened in ways none of them could have predicted. It wasn't just about providing a home anymore. It was about healing old wounds, learning to trust, and discovering what it meant to be a family. Mike, who had once been filled with anger, now found himself slowly letting go of the bitterness he had carried for so long. He began to see John not as the cop who arrested him, but as the father figure he never had. He didn't say it out loud, but his actions began to speak for him. He started opening up more, sharing pieces of his past and his fears for the future. John listened, offering advice when needed, but mostly just being there, a steady presence in Mike's tumultuous world. Sara, too, was changing. She blossomed under John's care, gaining confidence in her schoolwork and beginning to make friends for the first time in years. The quiet, withdrawn girl was slowly becoming more talkative, and John could see the trust she had once been too afraid to give now shining in her eyes. Through all of this, one thing became clear. The past didn't define them. Mike and Sara weren't destined to be products of their upbringing. They had been given a second chance, and they embraced it fully. But it wasn't just the children who had changed. John, too, had undergone a transformation. For years he had seen himself as a protector of the law, someone who dealt with criminals and upheld order. But in becoming a father, he realized that his greatest act of service wasn't in the arrests he made. It was in the love he gave. John had once thought that the line between right and wrong was black and white, but now he saw the shades of gray in between. He understood that people were more than their worst mistakes, and that everyone, especially children, deserved a chance at redemption. And in the quiet moments, when he watched Mike laugh with Sara or saw the way they finally felt safe in their new home, John knew that he had found his own kind of forgiveness, not just for them, but for himself, for all the times he had walked away from people he could have helped but didn't. The three of them, John, Mike, and Sara, had formed an unbreakable bond, built on love, understanding, and the shared belief that they could be more than the circumstances life had dealt them. Years passed, and the small family that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances continued to grow stronger. Mike, now a young man, had gone on to college, something he never thought would be possible. He had chosen to study criminal justice, inspired by John's example, not the cop who arrested him, but the man who had given him a second chance. Sara, now a teenager, had grown into a confident young woman with dreams of her own. She excelled in school and had plans to become a teacher, hoping to help kids like her who needed guidance and love. John couldn't have been prouder of the two of them. The years had been kind to them, but the real test of their bond came when Mike and Sara, now adults, returned home for a special reunion. John had recently retired from the force, and to celebrate, his closest friends and family had gathered for a small get-together at his house. As the guests mingled, John found himself standing by the window, watching as Mike and Sara pulled into the driveway. It had been a while since they had all been under the same roof, and the sight of them stepping out of the car, laughing together, filled John with a sense of pride he couldn't quite put into words. As they walked into the house, John met them at the door, his face breaking into a smile. But it wasn't until Mike stepped forward, his voice slightly choked with emotion, that the true weight of the moment hit him. "Dad," Mike said softly, the word carrying years of meaning that went unspoken. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For believing in us when no one else did." John, his eyes filling with tears, nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He looked at Sara, who was now standing beside her brother, her eyes glistening as well. "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the lump in her throat. In that moment, the house was filled with the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The silence of a love so deep, so profound, that it didn't need to be explained. It was the kind of love that had turned a cop, once hardened by the world, into a father who had given everything for the two children he had once arrested. For John, this reunion wasn't just a celebration of his retirement. It was the culmination of years of love, growth, and redemption. He had once thought his greatest legacy would be his work as a police officer, but as he stood there, surrounded by his children, he knew that his real legacy was the family they had built together. In the years that followed, Michael and Sara went on to build their own lives, but the lessons they learned from John remained with them. Mike, now a dedicated criminal justice advocate, worked tirelessly to reform the very system that had once threatened to pull him and his sister apart. He knew firsthand how easy it was for kids like him to fall through the cracks, and he made it his mission to ensure that others were given the second chances he and Sara had been so lucky to receive. Sara, too, found her own path. She became a teacher, dedicating her life to helping children from underprivileged backgrounds. Her classroom was a sanctuary for kids who had never felt seen, a place where they could learn not just academic lessons but life lessons, lessons about resilience, about hope, and about the importance of compassion. As for John, retirement didn't slow him down. He continued to work quietly behind the scenes, supporting Mike and Sara in their efforts, while also mentoring other young officers, teaching them the value of empathy and understanding in their work. He often told them, "The badge doesn't make you a hero. It's the choices you make when no one's looking that define you." Their story, which had begun in conflict and fear, had now come full circle. What started as an arrest had turned into an adoption, and what began as a broken family had blossomed into something whole, something strong. The reunion, years later, wasn't just a celebration of John's retirement. It was a testament to the power of love, the strength of second chances, and the belief that people are more than their worst moments. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are won, not with force, but with kindness and understanding. John's legacy wasn't written in police reports or commendations. It was written in the hearts of the two children who had once been lost, but were now found. And as he sat with Mike and Sara that night, watching them laugh and talk about their future plans, he knew that this family they had built, was the greatest achievement of his life. In the end, it wasn't the arrests or the accolades that mattered. It was the love they shared, the lives they had touched, and the belief that no matter where you come from or what you've done, you can always find your way home.